Card draw is extremely important in every Commander deck, and you're going to want to make sure you have enough of it in every single one of them. In my guide to building a Commander deck video, I mentioned how many of these cards you need in a deck, but I didn't go in depth with it. In this video, I'll try to explain what kinds of card draw there are and how to ration it in any given deck. I've marked each section of the video for your future reference as well, but I'll start with the basics and move on from there. First, let's start with which colors are the best for card draw. First is, of course, blue. Second is black, third is red, fourth is green, and fifth is white. Card draw looks different in all of these colors, but they are similar. And there's plenty of, I can't mesh my fingers, overlap. And this list, it's not a hard and fast law, it's more like a guideline. So, it's just kind of helping you pick which cards you might want to put in your multicolored decks. But it's all very up in the air. Red and green, for example, could probably switch spots depending on who you talked to, and white has definitely gotten better over the years. I won't go very in depth with each color in this video, but check out future videos in this playlist that I'll post later with each color in their own separate videos. In this next section, we'll go over the 7 different types of card draw. Okay, maybe they don't need to be separated that much, but I find that being able to tell which kind your card draw spells are really help you pinpoint what you need and what you don't need in any given deck. The 7 types of card draw are one-off card draw, activated card draw, triggered card draw, combat card draw, extra step card draw, pseudo card draw, and flex spot card draw. You might already be able to tell which of these, what they are and what they do and how they work, but let's break them down to be clear as mud. One-off card draw is as easy as it sounds. It's a spell that draws us a card one time, and that's usually it. This takes the form of any type of spell, instant, sorcery, creature, etc. Glimpse of Freedom, Spirited Companion, Harmonize, and Tainted Well are some examples of one-off card draw. You cast them, you draw a card, and that's about it. Though you may have some added effects from any given card, like Tainted Well. And cards like Glimpse of Freedom can be played later from the graveyard with its escape cost. So technically it's a 2-off. Spirited Companion and cards like it also have the added benefit of being able to be used multiple times in Flicker type decks. Or you could run Cloud Conceer in blue that has the same effect in a Yarok deck to trigger that ability multiple times. And while there are always exceptions to the rules, most of these cards will be played once and just will be done with. And that's okay. You can run a few of these in all your decks and you should be fine. But if you run too many of these cards in a deck, you could be in trouble. And we'll talk about balancing this later in the video. Now, activated card draw is the next easiest to understand, and the best card to do that with is Arcanus the Omnipotent. These card draw spells have some sort of cost you can pay to draw cards. In this case, it's just tap them to draw 3 cards. In another case, there's Dimir Guildmage. Pay 3 and a blue to have any player draw a card, and it'll probably be us, but you get it. These cards stay out on the battlefield and are reusable. These cards can also have additional costs to draw the cards, like on Dockside Chef, where you have to pay the mana, sacrifice something, and then draw the card. These can trigger other things you have as well, and can be very useful in Graveyard Matters decks. Triggered card draw is mighty important in a lot of decks. Green relies on this a ton. This type of card draw will pretty much always come in the form of a permanent, usually creatures, enchantments, or artifacts. Green, like I said, has cards like Colossal Majesty and Shaper's Sanctuary that trigger off your creatures or when something happens to your creatures. There are sometimes other effects in these types of cards though, but we're just focusing on the card draw aspect of it, so let's not get caught up on that. Another kind of effect on a triggered card draw permanent is a creature dying. Midnight Reaper, Stonehaven Outfitter, and the Swarm Lord are all great examples of this. Sometimes it just happens, other times you have to reach a certain goal to draw those cards, like the counters or being equipped. These are fairly common and are used a lot. I'd say triggered card draw spells are great in any deck, but to really make them shine, make sure your deck can reach those small goals for your creatures. Like if you aren't putting a lot of +1/+1 counters on those creatures, or if you don't have any equipment out, these cards are just not gonna trigger. So they basically become a dead card on board. So make sure you're able to trigger them. These can be considered enabler type spells that help a deck run, so be careful and don't put in too many of these cards in your deck, as you might not be able to trigger some of them all the time. This section is almost identical to the triggered card draw section. All these spells are triggered abilities on permanent spells. If you don't know what a triggered ability is, pause this video, take a look at my explanation on them in this video here. These cards will only trigger during combat, and most of these types of cards are only upon combat damage. Aradesh the Founder and Werewolf Pack Leader trigger when you attack with a certain power goal, but that's less common, and most of these cards are going to be triggered through combat damage. Cold-Eyed Selkie, Ancient Silver Dragon, and Glint-Eye Nephilim are all great examples of this happening. These are really great in the decks they're in, but they can be more narrow at times. To open up this narrow path, however, we can run cards like Thopter Spy Network that draw cards whenever one or more artifact creatures deal combat damage to a player. Really great in those artifact decks. Keeper of Fables does the same for non-human creatures. Kind of a sleeper card in my opinion, and I think it should be run more. It's really great. And Tadeus, Juniper Ascendant, does the same thing, but for all creatures. So you kind of look for that on these types of cards. There are a bunch of these, and they are all fantastic. Drawing just one extra card on your combat phase can really help the deck move along in a game. And these might not be the most powerful examples, but you get it. Now, these are once again not to be used too frequently. Some of these can even be more difficult to trigger than the regular triggered card draw because you have to get through an obstacle. You have to get through your opponent's creatures and able to trigger them. So do not run too many of them. But if you can make it happen, it always feels really nice. Extra step card draw is actually really simple. It's just drawing a card with a small barrier in the way. These cards have an extra trigger to get you the extra card. Think clue tokens. Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector are Pauper All-Stars and simply enter to create a clue token. You don't draw that card immediately, but you'll probably draw it on a later turn. These types of cards are definitely not as strong as just drawing the card on their own, but a lot of token decks or artifact decks really love to have them. Like I said in Pauper, 1 mana drop, you get a clue. Use that later. Junk tokens from Fallout are also extra step card draw spells, but I'll get to those in a second because it plays right into the next section. Segue. Pseudo card draw. Pseudo means it's not genuine or spurious or a sham, meaning it's not true card draw, but it kind of is. Red is the best at this kind of card draw. Think impulse draw. Going back to the junk tokens, they say tap it, sacrifice this artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. So we're technically dumping our top card into a zone outside the game, but junk allows us to play that card on the same turn. The card isn't in our hand, and it's possible we get something that we can't play that turn, and then it's just gone forever, but at least it gets through the deck and sees what's next. Like I said, red decks really like these types of spells, and I'd highly recommend them. 2 more examples would be Ren's Resolve and Reckless Impulse, which I mention all the time because they're the best, which allow you to exile the top 2 cards and play them until your next turn, so you've got a lot more opportunity. This brings me to the next part of pseudo card draw, and that's what I like to call commune cards. Commune with nature being the namesake. These types of cards let you look at the top X cards of your library and pick something from among them and put it into your hand. It's usually creatures or lands or something like that. They can be extra targeted as well with Commune with Dinosaurs, or they can be more generic. Benefaction of Ronus, Blood Price, and Ajani's Influence are fantastic examples of this effect. Look at the top X, find a type of card, and put the rest on the bottom of your library or into your graveyard. What I like about these cards is that they help you find a specific thing that you might need during any given game, like a creature or a land, or sometimes a planeswalker, whatever it is. They put the card into your hand, so you've effectively drawn a card, which means you found exactly what you might need instead of blindly drawing cards. I will say, however, these cards are notoriously unreliable sometimes, So you should not solely have them in your decks as card draw. I've had these fail so many times and it just feels bad. Look at the top 5 to find a land. Okay, no, there's no lands. Okay, now what? But when they do work, they actually do quite a good job. Now, if you watch the 2024 deck guide video, I explain what a flex spot is. A flex spot is the charm spot in your deck. These are cards that do multiple things, and you might not always choose the same option from game to game. Azorius Charm is a great example of a flex spot card. Its second mode is to just draw a card, but its other 2 options are really good sometimes. These spells do a one-off card draw effect, but they can't be considered as a one-off card draw spell because there's these other options that you might use instead. Abzan Charm is another one that I've used in decks that I really love. Am I always going to draw 2 and lose 2? Probably not. These spells are flexible and they can't be used as definitive card draw spells, so do not slot these in as regular card draw. How many of each type should you put in your decks? This section is really hard to quantify. Every deck is different and every deck needs certain types of card draw to function properly. I went through so many of my decks and I chose the best ones I thought could be good examples. And I'll go through them to show you how different they are and why I put the cards in that I do. Like I said, it's really hard to quantify. In my Nalia de Arnis deck, I've got 1 one-off, 0 activated, 6 triggered, 1 combat, 1 extra step, 1 pseudo, and 1 flex spot. This deck is running a lot of small party creatures and triggers happen constantly. Rumor Gatherer likes seeing creatures enter, so this will trigger a lot. Grim Haruspex realizes that those creatures can and will die, so this can trigger a lot. And then there's Black Market Connections. Of course, it's in a black deck, which is a no-brainer. This just happens every turn, we just have to pay the life for it. Then there's my Saheeli the Gifted deck, and it's got 4 one-off, 0 activated, 4 triggered, 1 combat, 1 extra step, and 1 pseudo. Oh, and 2 flex spots. Artifacts are so easy to draw cards from that there are more one-offs in this deck. Thoughtcast and Reverse Engineer, for example, are fantastic spells that can cost significantly less, and they're so easy to just use. And since there's a lot of artifacts in the deck, Joyer Weatherlight Captain and Vedalken Archmage trigger constantly when I play them. My last example will be my Inalla Archmage Ritualist deck. There are 7 one-offs, 2 activated, 1 triggered, 1 combat, 3 extra step, 2 pseudo, and 0 flex. This deck is pretty straightforward. Cast wizards, make a copy of that wizard, trigger stuff. Since Inalla wants you to cast wizards, we can double up on the enter the battlefield effects, like one-off card draw. Merchant of Secrets is really simple and ETBs to draw a card, and with Inalla copying it, for 1 mana, we'll draw 2 cards from this effect. Disciple of Bolas is similar, but it lets you choose how many cards you draw, depending on which creature you sacrifice based on its power. And finally, Seagate Oracle is a kind of one-off / pseudo card draw all in one. Look at the top 2 and put 1 in your hand, and then you double it up with Inalla. Each deck is different and needs a lot of work to function properly. Take into account what your deck wants to do and try to match your card draw options with that goal. If you're running more of a Spellslinger deck, you probably don't want a lot of combat damage type card draw spells that will just never trigger. You'll probably opt for more of those one-offs or pseudo card draw spells. Flashback spells in those types of decks are really, really good. And reverse of that, if you want to swing with lots of creatures with less spells, you'll probably want more of that type of effect. Bring in more triggered and combat card draw with a few one-offs to balance it out, so you don't get stuck. Card draw spells come in many shapes and sizes. Not all of them work in every deck, and you may need to play around with what works for your commander and what works for that commander's goals. Take a hard look at what you're trying to accomplish and think about which of these 7 types of card draw would be best in your deck. And remember, when building your deck, don't let anyone else tell you what cards you should put in there. If you don't have the money for it, or you like a specific card because it's meaningful, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, and just play the game how you want to play the game. Okay, well, I hope this all made sense, and I hope that this video helps you know which types of card draw there are, and how they might be used. Make sure you purchase those card draw spells through that TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. And make sure you check out that Milkman Proxy link as well for the fantastic products you can only find there. The affiliate link really helps out on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for your weekly dose of magic. Whoa! I actually almost fell there.